In order to determine the appropriate types and amount of evidence needed to be satisfied that the client financial statements are fairly stated, so there are 4 decisions of evidence need to be considered. The first one is what audit procedures to be used. Audit procedures is the detailed instruction that explains the audit evidence to be obtained during the audit. It is common to spell out this procedure in sufficiently specific terms so an auditor may follow these instructions during the audit.
For example, examine the cash disbursements journal in the accounting system and compare the payee name, amount, and date with online information provided by the bank about checks processed for the account. A disbursement is a payment in cash during a specific time period and is recorded in the general ledger of the business. A record of disbursements shows how the business is spending cash over time.
Second, sample size. After audit procedure is selected, it will be what sample size to select. Auditors can vary the sample size from 1 to all the items in the population being tested. This helps ensure that the sample is representative of the entire population and provides a reasonable basis for drawing conclusions about the financial statement. The goal of determining the appropriate sample size is to obtain sufficient and reliable evidence to support the auditor's conclusions about the financial statements.
As an illustration, to verify cash disbursement, suppose 6,600 checks are recorded, the auditor might select a sample size of 50 checks. The decision of how many times to test must be made by the auditor for each audit procedure.
Furthermore, items to select. After determining the sample size for an audit procedure, the auditor must decide which items in the population to test. The specific sample size can vary depending on several factors, including auditor's risk assessment, the desired level of confidence, and the characteristic of the population being tested. However, in practice, auditors often use statistical sampling techniques to determining the appropriate sample size based on the above factors. For example, random sampling, systematic sampling, and cluster sampling.
This can be demonstrated by this method. Firstly, select a week and examine the first 50 checks. In this method, the auditor selects a particular week within the audit period and examines the first 50 checks issued during that week. It provides a systematic way to ensure a representative sample from a particular time frame. Next, select the 50 checks with the largest amount. This method involves identifying and examining the 50 checks with the highest monetary values. It can be employed when the auditor wants to focus on larger transactions, as error or fraud may have a greater financial impact in such cases. Next, select the check randomly. Random selection involves using a statistical or random process to pick 50 checks from the entire population without bias. It is a common approach when the auditor wants to minimize the potential for manipulation or favoritism. Lastly, select those checks that the auditor thinks are more likely to be in error. In this method, the auditor uses their professional judgment. It allows auditor to focus on areas where the suspect issue or where historical problems have occurred. Each method has its own advantages and limitations, and the choice of which method to use may depend on the auditor's objective and the perceived risk in the population being examined. Auditors often use a combination of these methods, as their ultimate goal is to obtain reliable evidence to support the audit's conclusion.
Lastly, timing, which is when the auditor has to perform audit procedures. The timing of audit procedures can therefore vary from early in the accounting period to long after it has ended. Normally, the client wants the audit to be completed from 1 to 3 months after financial year end. However, timing also influenced by when the auditor believes that the audit evidence will be most effective and when audit staff is available. In a nutshell, timing is a fundamental aspect of audit planning. The auditor must carefully consider the timing of their work to ensure that it is both effective and efficient in detecting material misstatements and providing the reliable financial information.
For instance, inventory observation, minimizing the risk of significant discrepancies between the recorded inventory and the actual physical count. Next, account receivable allows the auditor to verify the existence and amount of outstanding receivables as of the year end. To conclude, the recorded and the actual must be synchronized so that it can be helped to detect any material misstatement.
Next, we move to test of controls. Test of controls are audit procedure performed by auditors. The purpose are to assess the effectiveness of an organization's internal controls and ensure that financial statements are accurate and reliable. It is also an essential part of the audit process and help auditors gain confidence in the control environment. Whether it performed by manual or automated, this evidence need to be included. The first evidence is inquiry and observation. The purpose of this evidence is to understand how internal controls are designed and how they operate. The second one of the evidence is inspection of documents and records. The purpose to examine supporting documentation and records related to internal controls. Lastly, re-performance. The purpose to independently execute a control procedure to validate its effectiveness. Now we move to application test of control in auditing. The first step is understanding the internal control environment. Before applying test of controls, auditor need to gain a deep understanding of the organization's internal control environment. This involves assessing the design of controls and understanding how they operate. The second step is identifying key controls. Auditors identify key controls relevant to the audit objective. These controls are typically those that are essential in preventing or detecting material misstatement in the financial statement. The third one, assessing control risk. Auditors assess the control risk associated with the key controls. Control risk is the risk that the internal control will not prevent or detect a material misstatement. If control risk is assessed as low, auditors may rely more on the control and perform fewer substantive procedures. The fourth one, selecting the sample. Auditors determine the sample size and select specific transactions or items for testing. The sample should be representative and statistically significant. The next step is performing the control test. Auditors perform the control test, which involve testing a sample of transactions or items to determine whether the control has been effectively applied. This may include examining supporting documentation, reperforming control procedure, or interviewing personnel. The sixth step, evaluating the result. After performing the test of control, auditors evaluate the result. If the control operates effectively in the sample, auditor may conclude that the control is operating effectively throughout the period. If issues are identified, auditors assess the potential impact on the financial statement. The seventh step, documenting the result. Auditors document the result of the control test, including any issues identified and the scope of testing. Proper documentation is essential for transparency and supporting their conclusion. After documenting the results, the auditor may assessing control rates. Based on the result of the control test, auditors reassess the control risk. If the control appears to be effective, control risk may be low and auditors may rely on it. If issues are significant, control risk may remain high, leading to an increase in substantive testing. The ninth step, adjusting audit procedure. Depending on the assessment of control risk, auditor adjusts their audit procedures. If control risk is low, auditor may perform fewer substantive procedures. If control risk remains high, auditors may increase substantive testing. Lastly, forming an audit opinion. After conducting tests of controls, auditor consider the result along with other audit procedures and evidence to form an overall opinion on the fairness and accuracy of the financial statement.